Good afternoon. This is the meeting of the Housing and Building Committee. I am Sarah Stone. I'm the chair of this committee, and I would like to call the roll. Councilman Stone or Councilman Cohen.
Here.
We are waiting on Joe DeWitt Foy. We also have with us the Mayor Merrick Petrus, Council President Tony Kuda, Councilman Craig Cobb, Councilwoman Gail Larson, and then and Councilman Jim Posh. Also with us is Director Eric Samf, Assistant Director Alan Ballard, and Assistant Director Eric Emily. Did I miss anybody? Okay. Our meeting today really will cover two topics. We'll be looking at law director. Yes, our law director's just joined us as well. We'll cover two topics today: an overview from our planning and housing department about a upcoming city code review, review the housing and building codes, as well as a look ahead to their work in the future. The second part of this meeting will be a preliminary discussion of short-term rental legislation. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric Sands.
Well, thank you, Councilwoman Stone, and thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight and talk about some of the things that we're hoping to do this year. And it's really more than just a code update. We sort of titled this as Reexamining Building and Housing. So there's a number of components, and this is really a broader look at our building and housing services. And so the mayor's office and the planning department, because this is where building and housing is under that umbrella, we want to take a fresh look, right? We've got a new mayor, new administration. We want to take a look at our approach, and that's there's really four key things that we want to do as part of this, and there's a lot more, of course. The first one is to look at our codes. So we'll talk about this in a second, but we've got codes that are a hodgepodge over a number of years, and often they don't talk to each other. We want to have better customer service, high tech and high touch. We go from those, learn from best practices, examine new approaches, and then identify and prioritize. So I want to go through each of those, with the first one being for the main factors of control. So at the end of last year in the budget process, during actually the budget workshop, I came before council and said that I had spoken with the administration at that time, which was then Mayor Kuda and Administrator Dumas, about adding into our budget a look at our codes. And we all agreed that this was a good idea. So it was something that was brought up in the budget workshop and then added to the budget. So the idea is that we purposely want to bring in somebody from the outside to take a look at our codes, at the building and housing codes, because all of us sitting at this table here, we deal with it on an everyday basis. We know it too well. And we know the ins and the outs of it, which is a problem, because we want somebody from the outside to come along and say, hey, this is a better way to do that. So the budget was set aside in 26, for 26. One of the nice things is that we're using our zoning code update as a model for this. So you'll see in a second, the scope is going to be a similar type of scope. We will need to issue an RFP because it's going to likely be about $50,000. And
I'm sorry, how much was that?
$50,000 is what we budgeted for it. And there will be opportunities for council and the committee to weigh in at multiple points in the process. So the next few slides are just what our building code is today, and you'll see how complicated it gets. So it starts off with Title I, which is the Residential Building Code of Ohio, and then the Ohio Building Code. So that's basic stuff. We adopted the Ohio Building Code, which is based on the International Building Code. That's great. But then, of course, we have to make it much more complicated. And so now we start to get into all our local provisions. So you can see here, there's Title III is all these local provisions. So these are things that are different than what the state code has. And a lot of these were added over time, and often they don't talk to each other. So one of the key things is we want people to come and take a look at, particularly these local provisions, and make sure that they still make sense, talk to each other, and maybe there's a better way to do that. Title V is the housing code. So that is Allen shop, that's code enforcement, which is also very complicated. And there is, what we haven't done here is adopted the International Property Maintenance Code that we haven't adopted. It's something that we want to take a look at because there's a model that's out there. And then Title VII is the Business Maintenance Code, which includes everything, including the most recent facade ordinance that was adopted. So there's a lot to our building code, and it's something that we really need somebody from the outside to take a look at. So the idea is that we will issue an RFP that will have this as the scope. And I want to go through it because really what we'd like to get from you guys today is have a discussion about this, see if there's anything that you think is missing. And then once we sort of get the okay, we can draft that RFP and get it out there. We'll need some time, obviously, to get responses and then bring that before council for adoption. So similar to our zoning code, the idea is to have them take a look at the existing code. So review the building code and see how it's integrated with existing and past building enforcement recommendations. So that includes the comprehensive plan or the master plan, it includes the NOVAC report, all the various things that we've done over the years that haven't necessarily been reflected in our code. We want this consultant to take a look at those things. Existing regulations for consistency with case law. We know very often with building and enforcement activities, there's a lot of case law. Other places have tried things and they're in the courts, so we should learn from that. Identify provisions that are not in our current regulations that the city may want to consider. This is where best practices come in. And then a big part of this, which we'll talk about in a second, is identify areas for streamlining the approval and the permitting process. That's probably the number one complaint we get is it's too hard to get through the process, to get a permit or to get a complaint registered or to rectify the complaint. So we want to, really dig into that part of this. And then there's just some things that need simplification and clarification. Making things graphically oriented will be an important part of this because people can respond to graphics better than a lot of words. So that's the main bulk of this is let's have a technical person take a look at this very closely. Number 2 is research model codes and ordinances, including the International Property Maintenance Code. Again, if we bring in somebody who's an expert in this, they'll have experience in, hey, Cincinnati did it this way. They're doing it this way in Dayton, and we can start to get that information. And then have an engagement component to it. That's number 3. So identify stakeholders, landlords, tenants. We really want to hear from the folks which this is most impacting and see where those tension points are and get input from them and the general public, of course. And then ultimately draft code amendments, which then we, the staff, would help bring through council. So I'll pause here, and this is the bulk of what we wanted to done today. If committee has any other thoughts on things we should be looking at in terms of building and housing code components.
I had a couple of comments. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the engagement process, how you would think that would be, managed most successfully. Do you have an idea of how you want that to work out? The item number 3.
Well, I'll throw an idea out there, and I'm not necessarily married to it, but we're using this in our other initiatives. So putting together a group, technical advisory tag, is a really good way to do this. So we can identify a group of 10 to 15 people who represent different components of stakeholders and have them there along the way. That doesn't mean that there won't be broader engagement, whether that's through surveys or public meetings, but have a group that's a little more involved in the process, because often what happens is that group then takes a little bit of ownership of it, and then they can help translate often what the government entity is saying to the general public.
That's a good idea.
So that's one approach.
Thoughts on that?
Well, so under now Mayor Petrus's chairmanship of the Housing Committee, I think back in 2024, he had 2 meetings, one with a group of realtors and one with a group of housing advocates that had actually some things that they agreed on, and it would be interesting to pull from those attendees folks, those are certainly stakeholders that have already been engaged in some of the thought processes and what we might do. And we have to figure out the appropriate way to do it, but certainly Judge Costello, I think understanding from our own case law and records, what are unique issues that we're seeing in Cleveland Heights perhaps, or where have we seen enforcement, like repeat offenders where enforcement isn't working? So I would love to have that be a component of the evaluation because we have decades of history, I think, on that very specific to our city.
And I would say, just to add to that, and then Gail, that, you know, these meetings can be an easy way to do that for you, you know, and I think it'll be informative for council to hear. I mean, I could imagine inviting him to come and give a presentation on issues that might be addressed by code. Gail.
Thank you. Happy you're doing this. Wondering if part of what can be considered as kind of where Councilor Cohen was going is looking at Cleveland's residents first, where they have empowered their inspectors to assess fines. So it doesn't take so very long for a house, once it's identified as a nuisance in a neighborhood, to amble along, nothing's being done. And then finally, it doesn't seem like nothing's being done. I mean, if you were to go and look at reinspection and stuff, there's probably actions being taken, but things aren't getting fixed. And not take so long and then to get to housing court where you also have things going on there that aren't effective in holding these landlords accountable. So I'm really interested in that Title V, 1365 enforcement and penalty phase, because our landlords that are not fixing their structures are not interested in complying with us. So
If I could just add, so that definitely falls within the model codes ordinances.
Great, thank
And
you.
you'll see later on, we do have an homage to the residents first later on in this presentation, but absolutely, yeah, next door we want to take a look at what they're doing.
And I just have one quick question. Will you be asking for input from residents as we go through this process?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's, whether that's done via surveys or these more open meetings, we know this is a topic that is very near and dear to many in the community.
As you create your methodology, it would be great if you give us I know you're just at the beginning of this process. Here's a roadmap of these public touch points and how can council set aside time either in these meetings or otherwise to help you through that process.
The one additional thing I was thinking is obviously this is specific to the housing and building codes, but the codes don't exist in a vacuum from all the other ordinances and things. So to the extent possible, and I'm thinking of zoning, in particular, and perhaps there are other parts of the codified ordinances, having part of the scope be identifying where we might need to have changes in other parts of the ordinances or other parts of the code, and also things that might impact that. And then one more point is that Judge Costello, has a diversion program that he started with a full-time employee. And I think in addition to the case law, like how effective has that been? That should be part of any change to our codes, because I'm hoping that it has been effective. And then that kind of goes hand in hand with enforcement, right? You don't need enforcement if you can have folks connected to resources.
Because the diversion program is for owner occupied.
Yes.
So
correct.
What I'm more interested in is rentals.
And I think we're going to have to. This hopefully will include everything, but we want to make sure that the owner occupied, because I think that's a challenge for a lot of folks that end up being referred to housing court and then enter the diversion.
It's frightening.
Yeah, it's intimidating.
You may cover this later in the presentation, but I would like to hear from you and from staff. What are the hot buttons? Where are the red alerts maybe there aren't any, or the things that are really just been troubling you for a long time in the code that you hope will be addressed in this study? I don't know if there's something that really led you to say, we got to do this.
I think it's a general feeling, but I'll defer to Alan and Eric about things off the top of your head that you think to change.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that we use frequently are the nuisance abatement ordinance. So we'll use that to get around some of the other codes and processes that we have to do. There is a process for nuisance abatement, but if something's immediate, we have to take care of it. That gives us the power. We've looked at some civil penalties, stuff, and adding that, to our review code. We're modeling other cities, and instead of just putting another piecemeal section in, we're gonna take a full holistic approach to it. Trying to think of some other issues that
Could also just be something that's new that really never was addressed in the code that's arisen over the last short
I
period.
think the way our occupancy ordinance is sort of layered with multiple different versions from the get-go that probably should have been blended together better, is problematic. We've got some out-of-county owner registration issues that we're dealing with through some litigation. So we're trying to figure out some of those, but I think, reviewing those and seeing where they fit better, making things flow better, and eliminating duality and duplicity in the code will help quite a bit.
Thank you. Oh, Jim, or Eric did just a follow on that.
Same thing Michelle was saying, I think.
So I'm gonna go on a limb and say we kind of have a housing problem in Clayton Heights. And I don't know exactly what that problem is, but you hear a lot of chitter chat about people complaining about sort of the way that we manage kind of maybe our housing programs. And this is a great best practice to deploy, to get everybody on board, kind of a team exercise to sort of like, let's figure it out. But I'm a little concerned about the time frame. First of all, I'm very supportive in this. Don't get me wrong by what I'm about to say, but is there low-hanging fruit that we can deploy right away? Or if we know we've got 10 building owners or something like that, that we really need to do a focused level of enforcement for. I guess what I'm afraid of, these things take a year to get through. We'll just say a year. I'm kind of afraid that, we're gonna not stop everything during the year, but we're gonna wait for the results of this before we start doing anything. And I'm a little worried about that.
Well, I'll say.
So I'll say that none of the enforcement has stopped during any part of it. And if there are 10 buildings, not 10 building owners that need addressed, we'll be out there and we'll take necessary action. Whatever the necessary action is, whether it's referral to housing court, request inspections, right? We'll follow our code to enforce those. I think this can only help us, in refining that process, getting something done faster if the codes work better, and clarifying to residents and to the staff what needs to be done in a time frame. But the enforcement never stops. It slows down in certain cases where we have issues with the code. But it's specific to properties, not property owners. We have to be clear on that. And we're always identifying the next one to take to prosecution.
Yeah. So I don't think there's a better example of a topic that needs the three branches of government firing on the same cylinder as housing. Because, as Eric was saying, you got to have a housing code that, where it streamlines the process, where the process is streamlined, where, the different sections talk to each other and work together. The administration has to be on board with the changes that are made to the housing code and be willing to enforce them, staffing and, the things we have in place and follow through and timeliness and all that, the things we mostly get complaints about. And then the judicial branch, and I've been to housing court as much as anybody, except maybe Gail. There's a lot of cases that linger and linger and linger. And I think one part of the code we have to look at is the enforcement section. Do we want to give the judge, and I don't mean this judge, because this should never be looked at as, what's this judge doing? To me, that's not even exactly relevant. But do we want them to have that latitude, or do we want to streamline it where, you know what? This happens, this is the fine, and there's much less leeway. And if I've lived here since 1961. If I've heard anything more consistent than we used to be much more vigilant on enforcement. I don't think, if you have one of those word charts, that would be the thing that I've heard the most. The enforcement used to be tougher. You didn't get away with stuff as much. The penalties were swifter and faster and so forth. So I think that if we look at it both as an update and then what we want to do and the way the three branches interact effectively to make, for what makes a strong housing policy. I think it has to be looked at as, and I have complete confidence that this administration is going to be focused on this.
Couple things. One is, Councilor Posh, to your point, I think perhaps we could see, depending on the initial assessment from the consultant, ultimately, perhaps we could take a phased approach, like we are thinking about with the zoning code updates, like if there's low-hanging fruit that's just very clear that there's a conflict, there's a mess, something that we need to clean up, we could do that. And on that note, one question, which procedurally, is this like zoning code changes where we have to ping pong between council and planning? No, this is straight legislation. Council introduces, 2 readings. Okay, so it's a much more streamlined process. And then a couple other things I want to say, just building permits. I have heard so much from the community on how difficult that is to get. And I've had done work on my own house, and I've had contractors complain to me who work in numerous other municipalities. So I'm glad that that's there. And I want to make sure, I presume it is, I just want to make sure that we're going to be exploring digital ways to not just improvements on what we've always been doing, but actually, perhaps digital tools that will help us move into the next phase of modernity. Okay. And then the other thing is on inspections. I'm presuming point of sale inspections is that in?
Yes.
This is in, right? So one of the things that I've seen personally when I bought and sold a house here, and this was under the safe belt inspector framework, was there was no equity in terms of the rigor of inspections, right? They cited my house that I was selling for cracks in the garage floor, but they didn't cite the house that I was buying for cracks in the garage floor. And so I just want to make sure that when we think about inspections, and it may not be maybe it's a code piece, maybe it's an operational piece, that we think about how we're going to ensure rigor across inspections, because particularly for those that are selling and buying in the same city, but also, we should not be privileging buyers over sellers or sellers over buyers. Like every inspection, no matter which inspector does the inspection, should be consistent across the city, especially with the point of sale and the escrow requirements and things like. And it goes into, I'm not saying anything people here don't know, but it goes into the negotiations of sale prices for homes, and this is real money that people are paying to come live in our community, and we want to make sure it's fair and equitable.
I would just like to pick up on one of the points you made, and that is one of the things that pleased me the most about this is the zoning and the housing studies are coincidental. And so I hope that there'll be a chance to build in sort of consulting points to say we're at this point, and the 2 studies are always talking to each other so that we don't end up on different limbs of the tree. But I know you have some more to present, so
Yeah, and-
anybody else have comments?
So thank you for the input. I think we have enough to make this scope of work in this RFP something that we can get out on the street, and of course we'll keep apprised of that. So
Sorry, Director Zam, one more thing on my wish list of things when it comes to building permits. Can we make sure that we think about how to streamline the information we provide to residents for our Grow Tax Incentive Plan, right? Like if you're submitting permits for $10,000+ in improvements, that would and we've talked about this before, that would be valid for an abatement application, then we should be operationally directing residents in that way. And so I think I don't think that's a code thing, I think that's an operational thing, but it should be top of mind about integrating city departments and processes.
More to come on that, absolutely.
Yes, I know you guys are working on that. I just want to say it here in the housing meeting while we're all discussing it here.
So actually somewhat along the same lines, a second component or objective that we'd like to accomplish in this reexamination is improving customer service. So we're trying to apply a high tech and a high touch philosophy here. And this really applies to both when we're talking about inspections, the concerned resident, the neighbor, and the property owner. So what do we mean by that? So the public, right now the public can file complaints in a number of different ways, but very often that involves having to send an email, talk to a council person, call up the department, and there's no easy way for the public to keep track of where did my complaint go. So we're looking into ways for CitizenServe, which is our portal, to provide that information or some limited information. And that's, an important point. We don't want to give every piece of information at every moment in time because some of it is, the person's working through a compliance issue, things like that. But we also want to make sure that CitizenServe can talk to SeeClickFix, which is the Mayor's Action Center, because right now there's a lot of duplication and overlapping services there. So that's for the public. The concerned resident is how do we get the information better to them? For the property owner, we also know that we need to improve our service there. We want to tell folks early and often what's going on. And you'll see, it's not in another slide, but it's built into what I want to say on another slide is there's a new approach out there, which is not just, the inspector comes out and says, hey, you've got a correct foundation here, but and here's the services that are available for that, whether there's an incentive through our HPO office or another outside of the city organization. So it's a little more hand-holding that the inspectors can do because they're the people who are actually on the ground. So that's that high touch part of it is, sure, you're going to do your stuff through CitizenServe, but we also want to have that person who's there to help you get to compliance. That's the goal.
Are you anticipating there'll be like a broadening of the software platform that's going to require some support in order for this broadening out of CitizenServe?
We're not sure yet. The answer is probably yes, but we don't know yet if that involves additional funding. Obviously, we'll tell that to you in the budgetary process.
Would that be something that we would want to put in the RFP for the consultant? This would be great if you could suggest technological tools that would improve our processes, as part of that. I mean, I know that's a different skill set from a code consultant per se, but
that's my reluctance in putting it in there. But maybe there's a way we can throw it in as an optional test.
Right, not as a must-have, but if they have that capability or they, can direct us in the direction of someone who can, that would be helpful.
Is there any timeline for the project of integrating CitizenServe with SeeClickFix?
I don't know if we know a timeline. We about 3 weeks ago, had a conversation with IT, and they've been corresponding with CitizenServe. So it seems like it's possible that there are APIs that can make that translation, but we'll let the tech folks, talk about it. We also want to learn from best practices and examine approaches. So you'll see on the screen here, Residents First is up there on the left, and then the Center for Community Progress, which is a national organization that does a lot of really good work on mostly on the enforcement side. So we want to take a look at what our neighbors are doing, what they're doing well, and maybe what they're not so well. So that's where Residents First comes in. And then these new approaches to enforcement. So the reevaluating code enforcement approach is really a strategic approach, and it's probably worth another committee meeting to go through. They have a great presentation about how to rethink how you do code enforcement in a more strategic way. And so I'll leave it at that. What your appetite, you can I'll look it up online. But this is something where, we want to have a continued discussion with you about this. And one of the big things and why it's great that we are all under the same umbrella is we've been talking about having the building inspectors and the housing inspectors cross-train. Because while they have different certifications and they have different job descriptions, they're both out there dealing with their housing stock. And so having the ability for them to either be hybrid positions or at least to be able to identify a violation.
Not to mix again.
Yeah.
Correct.
So that's this step. And then I think this is something that Councilwoman Cohen was sort of alluding to is identifying and prioritizing enforcement categories. And I would say building categories as well. Because our codes are complicated. Even when they get revised, they're still going to be complicated. And there's everything under the sun that somebody could be cited for. But we have to, I think, identify what are those priorities. And so what we're going to propose to do is we're going to do an audit of all the violations that we issue and see which ones are the most common. And then sort of reach out to the community, maybe through a housing task force, to see what are the things that they think are the problems. And then come together and say, okay, we can't violate people on every single thing here. So what are the things that we want our inspectors to focus most on? This is an infographic from Hudson, where I think they did a good job of sort of highlighting probably the 6 or 10 things that were the most important to them, and they're probably among the most important to us. Tall grass, RVs, unregistered vehicles, garbage or litter, property disrepair, commercial vehicles. So those are like the things that they felt were the most important to visualize, and we need to do the same, because part of the problem, I think, in the community is everybody has a different idea of what housing compliance means. And so to the next door neighbor, they might know every little detail about their next door property because they have to live with it. But when we talk about across the city, the things that are happening next door may be lower on that list. And so I think we just as a community, as a council and administration, to identify what are the top 10, 15, 20, 50 things.
I just would maybe add to that on the maybe more extreme end of that train of thought. The thing that even as a newcomer, I've been hearing about most frequently are the fate of abandoned houses or houses that have been foreclosed on. And I wonder, as you're analyzing this, if you could give us a sense of what the population of those houses are and where are the sticking points to getting a resolution when you had a house that's been there for 4 years, and where are the barriers to moving forward to deal with a house that's never coming back,
Yeah.
or that needs to go to sheriff's sale and be sold. And I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, every case is unique, depending on where it goes. How early we identify it, if it's an elderly person who passed away versus somebody who's the bank has been chasing for years and filed multiple. So there's a unique case or path for each one, and I want to say we're fairly proactive on identifying these problem properties or potential properties that are having flags. Property investigator position researches all those foreclosures. Typically, we'll review all foreclosures, new foreclosures, identify whether they're vacant or not. We've got a couple ordinances, the foreclosure bond ordinances. If they're vacant and foreclosed on, the bank needs to put their money up, in case there's property maintenance issues that need to be done. So again, it's probably one of our biggest issues, monitoring vacant and foreclosure properties. It's not nearly as bad as it was in the 2008. Our property values are definitely back to where they were, but we've learned from those past issues, and we've got a lot of tools to do.
Yeah, I just think I agree with you. I think that now that you're evaluating the code, are there ways that we can really make it easier for these properties to find their final fate, if that really is where we are and what's standing out. So
This made me think that if the code is going to be changing in any way, which presumably it will. One of the outcomes from this process has to be communication with the residents and some sort of plan to inform them, maybe not by handing them the entire code and saying, here it is, but whether it's, with Director Schanz's team, social media, videos, pamphlets, something maybe, I don't know if we're still mailing the Focus magazine, but, making sure that it gets in there, because you don't want to do all this work and then have, one, nobody know about it, but also now we're talking about code enforcement. And if we're anticipating more code enforcement, then we should make sure to publicize that in some way that's easy for residents to understand and also know what to expect. So I guess put that on the back burner for now, but I'm hoping that the administration can, the planning department can work with the communications department to start that early to make sure that, it's ready to go once this is done.
Yeah, Assistant Director Butler. So about 3 years ago, I had asked you what the current vacant and abandoned property number was, and it was like 330. So 2 questions. Do you know where we're at now in somewhere? And secondly, what's the trend with foreclosures and bankruptcies, tax defaults and so forth?
I don't have an exact number for the vacant registrations. It could probably be a good time to look because the registrations were required in December. And so we should have a good idea from then to now who registered as a vacant property. I would say typically bank foreclosures are likely in the downslope, but more tax foreclosures are likely on an increase.
Interesting.
And that's just a trend that has been happening. I'm assuming that it's continuing that way. We have a little more control on a tax foreclosure with our partnerships with the county land bank and the county. So, just sort of forecasting where those go.
And I remember there was a shocking amount of property tax that had not been collected on an annual basis.
Yeah,
I know we don't collect that,
right,
but
a couple of large delinquent properties, and so at any one point, those large commercial and or other properties that have a significant amount of tax delinquency can skew that a little bit, but and I think it's a matter of how much the taxes are, what the economy is, and how the county is working on getting repayment plans or working with people for repayment plans.
Anything more?
That is our presentation.
Anything else at this time for this discussion? We will certainly be coming back to this. This is the start of a really important process. So thank you so much for your presentation. I know we'll move on to the next topic, and so our next discussion is about short-term rentals. So just to recap, I think I've sent to all the council members just a bit of history memo to get our heads around this legislation. Hi, Joe. Councilman, yes, quick voice joined us. Council last addressed this topic about a year ago and ultimately that resulted in some draft legislation, which I did circulate to you. It's a year later. Things have changed. The state has in committee some legislation that would prohibit municipalities from regulating short-term rentals unless they have a statute, if I'm saying this correctly, that is on the books, which we do not. We also have been successful, thanks to Mayor Petras, in reestablishing contact with Airbnb, who we just spoke with the Airbnb governmental affairs folks today. Had a very positive discussion about their role in assisting us with both enforcement and the creation of legislation that they can assist with. So I wanted to just really take this time before we move forward in this process to hear your views, Council, about really what you would like this legislation to accomplish. What are the big goals that we should be focusing on before perhaps we return to the draft legislation? There really, as I see it, I'm going to say something and I'm going to turn to our law director to perhaps amplify on this. There really are 3 components: registration, dealing with hazards and nuisances and bad actors and tax. And those are some variables that we can consider whether these are appropriate and necessary for us. But I would maybe like to turn to you for your comments about the legislation that was created and your recommendations as well.
Well, so just real briefly, and thank you, Madam Chair. I guess council's currently continuing to discuss sort of the nature and scope of the issue or the problem in the city, and I think that's appropriate. I don't disagree with the summary of the component parts of the pending or current draft of the legislation, other than maybe there's a section in there about ongoing operational requirements before you get to nuisance issues. But I think that's correct and accurate. I think the city's journey or the council's journey on this began with looking at initially a registration requirement sort of as a freestanding requirement that would allow the city to understand who had these, where they were located, how many there were in the city, and not necessarily do a lot beyond that. And then over a period of time, the draft that has been distributed to council resulted from modeling from the city of Cincinnati, along with the city of Dublin and some other areas to try to come up with regulations that would accomplish the pieces that you articulated. And I think that by May of last year or so, the planning department and the law department felt like this was at a pretty good stage of development. I believe that council president was like he laughed. Was involved in some of those discussions and was generally on board at that time as well. And then it just did not sort of get back on council's radar post that period of time. The issue that was more open at the time, I think, in the absence of more direction from the pending state legislation, was the excise tax piece. But I think that now there's maybe a little bit more clarity on that as well.
I'd like to just, pardon me, go ahead.
I might add to that I did the research and reached out to some of the cities that were on the same list that the law director is referring to. And our concerns were capacity, staffing capacity for maintaining the registry in the housing department and collecting the fees. And then also in the finance department of collecting, correctly posting these fees and appropriately tracking them to see what the revenues that were coming in. And so there is some concern about staffing capacity.
Yep. And in that memo that I sent you, the research memo, one thing that came to light as I was researching around Ohio is that the larger municipalities do collect tax. They do have a robust registration, and smaller municipalities, including South Euclid, whom you just sent to us, leave the tax alone. They simply want to be able to manage the properties and make sure they're not a public nuisance.
No, South Euclid does have a tax.
Oh, they do? Okay.
Yes, they do.
I'd like to just give you some.
And pardon me, I just wanted to add also, I think something that we weren't as clear on at the time that the Vice President referenced talking with Cincinnati and some others was the role or willingness of the hosting platforms to be involved in collecting and remitting the tax. And I think at this point, that's a pretty clear mechanism that would be available and would relieve a lot of the staffing concerns that were present at that time.
And pretty standard practice for those platforms.
Right.
Maybe I could just report on the conversation we had with Airbnb today, because there's some good information there. Very agreeable to collaborating with the city of Cleveland Heights on creating legislation and in serving as both an advisor and a collaborator. One of their initial recommendations about when we said when cities have implemented legislation, what worked the best? And their recommendations: do not try to do it all at once. The most effective thing you can do to start is to get all the properties registered and get your base of their sort of customer base or vendor base established, and have those properties understand the expectations of the city and do the kind of reporting and renewal that's required. If we did that, Airbnb said that they would help build out compliance campaigns to communicate with all of the properties on their platform to tell about what is expected of them and to help us follow up so that those properties are in fact registered. Cleveland Heights, in the previous administration, made initial steps to create an account on a city portal. This is Airbnb's communication with cities. It has centralized access to tools, including a law enforcement portal, and it's also a place where we can access a lot of data about what's happening in our registration. So that's happening now, is to get that login, and there can be multiple individuals on the city staff that can access the portal, and especially, I could talk more about that in a minute. I asked about the excise tax collector, and they said they believe they could work that out. So that step, especially since Airbnb currently collects tax on behalf of Cuyahoga County in our city, so they're already collecting. We asked about, what role Airbnb plays with enforcement. They said there really are three routes. One is that there is a law enforcement portal that would allow the chief of police to have direct contact with Airbnb at the time of both at the time and after a case happening, and the law enforcement officers can access data, including the names of the guests, the name of the owner, to act right then if need be, and also to investigate any crimes that might happen. Airbnb has their own self-reporting incident reporting section that is online 24/7. They have internal discipline processes. It's sort of a 3 strikes and you're out. There's more detail about that, but they are definitely willing to try to work with us so that whatever legislation we create parallels their processes and incorporates them. There's also a government escalation process, so any city council member, the law director, the mayor can go directly to Airbnb and say, our email is lighting up with this property, and they'll just take that as a complaint and move forward. One of the other good pieces of information also is that when the Airbnb conducts enforcement against a property, they have a reciprocal agreement with VRBO, so that if a property is taken off the platform, it's taken off at VRBO also. So that keeps them from hopping from platform to platform. So I think we have a good start. We've asked for sales data, just really to understand how big is the market here, how much money are people spending on Airbnbs, to really do an analysis about whether the excise tax and the related work is worth it. It's a pretty small universe. I think we have about, just by my rather primitive estimating, around 75, 80 properties here. So it's hard to know how active they are and how much money they're making, but we hope to get that information. We've also asked Airbnb to give they have a sort of a standard set of recommendations for cities that are developing legislation, so we'll be in receipt of that. So that was just this morning, so that's the start, but I think that we will be getting more help from the platform than maybe we thought we might.
Yeah, a few quick things. I spoke to Airbnb over 3 years ago. I started this legislation over 3 years. It wasn't last year, it was over 3 years ago. And their answer was, do whatever you want. We'll follow whatever you do. Because they were getting used to that. Amy Himmeline, who was our former finance director, is in South Euclid. She was able to set up the whole fee collecting thing herself. She did not even need a consultant. So I'm not saying because of that, you can extrapolate that anybody could do it, but it was done by somebody we know, and they did it without assistance.
You're saying if Amy could do it.
No, I knew you were going to say.
What's your name?
Amy.
South Euclid put this in place after there were 2 complaints. I can tell you personally that we've had dozens. Okay, and that was one of the arguments we had 3.5 years ago. Is this necessary? And I think that's a place you have to start. Are you trying to fix something that's not not a problem? Since there were 2 cities in Cuyahoga County when I started this that had regulations in place. There's got to be over a dozen. I think it's safe to say with the dozens of complaints that and I'm not the only one that people complain to, I have no delusions of that. But if I've gotten dozens of complaints, I would imagine that, between the housing department and other council people and mayors and what have you, you're gonna have complaints. I think the concerns are legitimate. And when I started this, I put all the complaints cut and pasted from emails up on that screen right there where Joe is. So I think I'm glad you're doing this. I found after looking at a lot of legislation, Cincinnati was by far the best. And it really stood out even 3.5 years ago among the cities that had done it. And there were some that were really bad too, no question about it. But theirs was really good. So I still think that is the model. The issues that I wrote down were that having a different occupancy permit was important because you want them registered separately. I like the idea of having a different set of regulations for owner occupied. We had some discrepancies about this, but this is the way South Euclid went. And I found that very interesting because I didn't have anything to do with their legislation, but they did have different regulations for owner occupied short-term rental than for not occupied.
President Kuna, can I just ask you what would make it owner occupied short-term rental? Is the person actually there and they're renting out a room?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a difference between owning the house and renting out the entire house versus being in the property at the
Yes.
same time as
A
the.
number of cities have a day limit if you must reside in the house 270 days a year or whatever.
That's what's in the current draft here.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, actually that is kind of, that's what I was trying to differentiate. Is the owner occupied mean that there is a minimum daily requirement that you're in the house and you're otherwise renting it out when you're not there? Or is owner occupied mean you're renting out one room in a house that you live in?
It means, that the owner lives in the house that you're renting.
That they're there while the
they're
short-term
Yes, they're
rental
there.
person is there. I guess I'm trying to understand what that,
I don't-
or if
Yeah,
if that's something that we.
I mean, people
could-
that rent their whole houses too and leave for the,
Right.
so that's a big segment of the
Right.
Airbnb.
And there's doubles and other variations.
Right, that's right.
Right.
But
But that was something we'd have to define, I guess is what
Yeah,
I'm hearing.
the
Okay.
data sharing between, police and inspectional services and so forth was really important because when you have a nuisance abatement, you want to have, you want to have data. I mean, you want to be able to say, hey, here's what this person has done. Fees we talked about. The nuisance regulations need to be specific for STRs, because they're the problem. And then the parking regulations. I wouldn't say noise is by far number one. And I got a lot of noise stories, and I'm not going to tell any of them now. But the parking situation is second. People not just parking over the sidewalk or in the street overnight, but people coming in to register at 3 o'clock in the morning, and running just that kind of parking stuff is,
Yep.
So anyway, those are some of the things
Thank
that
you.
we were trying to do.
I'm sorry that Director Zanf left because I know that parking is going to be part of the zoning code. So we would want to make sure that if we're doing, because I agree, I think my two biggest concern, and I'm for, we should have them here, but I want them to be regulated. And my two biggest concerns are parking, right? Because if you're having numerous people come to the house or rent, coming from out of town, and then also noise. My initial thought when this resurfaced for us with this new term was thinking about how we could have stronger penalties for short-term rentals versus within our nuisance ordinance. Now, I don't know if other cities, and I think that's really a question I have as we go through this. Do other cities differentiate in terms of penalties, not just, because we know that Airbnb, it looks like we have levers to pull, but can we differentiate in the nuisance ordinance?
So I think you'll find that when you have an opportunity to look at this, a lot of that was worked through
Okay.
at the time and in a way that was intended to be flexible but also rigorous. So on parking, for example, it requires the registrant to acknowledge that the rental is required to comply with all existing on and off street parking requirements for the property, including not blocking driveways, parking overnight on street where applicable, and not intruding into the sidewalk. So it would, even if the substantive requirements changed in the zoning code, those would be imported
Okay.
under this provision as currently drafted. And on noise, and this came, I believe, from Dublin, we defined a condition interfering with the use and enjoyment of properties within the vicinity of a short-term rental to include, but not be limited to, noise audible beyond the boundary of the property on which the short-term rental is located. So that's also, and that violations of these conditions can, on the first violation, require a termination and a prohibition against re-registration for 6 months. The second one is for a year, and the third one is permanent.
Is that, sorry, President, just a question on that. Is the noise that, and I'm looking at, I guess it's A1, is that the same as?
It's like 50 feet is.
Okay, that's, yeah, okay, so this would be a more restrictive.
Correct.
Okay, excellent, okay, thank you.
And there's one that I failed to mention, and I don't think it made it into the legislation, but this was the notification of neighbors that an Airbnb is going to be there. It serves for a couple of huge purposes. One is that you don't want neighbors calling the police because they think somebody's breaking into a house, which they wouldn't think that if they knew that it was an Airbnb, a short-term rental, because
Right.
I don't know how many of these companies there are now. And actually, the other reason just jumped out of my head, but it was important to a lot of people.
A number of cities, have that do conditional use permits require that for like 2 weeks, a comment period or a sign up that says this house is going to be an Airbnb.
Can we make sure that the legislation also addresses if a renter parks in a neighbor's driveway or blocks a neighbor's driveway? I mean, I don't know if that's illegal. It's
covered. Yeah.
It's covered. Okay.
Yeah, it's in there now.
And actually, so that's what I was gonna ask, is that right now, they would be, were you considering at any time making this a conditionally permitted use in a single family or multifamily zoning district?
Well, what do you mean? Because there's already, a conditional.
That it would have to go to the planning commission and that would.
Misheard you.
Yeah.
We never talked about that.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. I think it's, unless you can get it, unless it wouldn't be unless it would like administrative approval, which we've done on some zoning changes also. But I guess if I haven't read through everything in the legislation, but something that does do is required proximate neighbor notification, right? That this is happening and input. And one of the things, the other piece, which I haven't fully thought out yet, but we have had on the planning commission the years that I was on, lot re-subdivisions and, where they've joined lots or separated lots to have a carriage house, and neighbors came and said, well, they're separating the lots and doing this carriage house because they're going to rent it out as an Airbnb. And the planning commission could not consider the use of they couldn't consider the use and whether or not to grant the subdivision or not. And I'm just bringing that forward as do we want that as a factor? I don't know. I know I'm complicating this, but
Let's just leave it as an issue on
Yeah.
this.
Director Zanf, I'd love to hear.
right. That's
Yeah.
why I'm sorry he left. But
Yeah,
that's
that-
the type of thing where how does this interact with the other
I mean-
pieces and parts?
You just got on that, which, is not really worth that much. It's just, that's a lot. That's messy.
Well, and I think if we have a very streamlined, simple neighbor note, I think the most important thing is that neighbors know
Yes.
and they are
Far more
able to have opportunity for recourse. I
Yeah.
think that's really
I wanna just make sure, Councilman DeWitt Foy, we've been perhaps having our, not turning to you, so I wanna make sure if you have any questions or comments that you can add them.
Yeah, thanks. So part of this is technical in nature, and I don't know, but going to the conversation around differentiating between like a full-time short-term rental and a house that somebody rents out either part of or all of it for a portion of time. If we are able to differentiate there and say, for full-time short-term rental properties, would it be possible to tax those as commercial properties versus residential? I do believe other municipalities do this, and it changes the tax rate that it would be assessed locally. So that would be another thing to consider.
Thank you.
Yeah, going back to notifying neighbors, we did discuss the opportunity, if it was available, it's alluded to, but I don't think it got in the legislation, about when people come into, I'm talking about multiple family apartment buildings mostly, that there's some way to differentiate between, how you have a posting on your elevator that says your elevator's been inspected. Something perhaps at the entrance that these are the Airbnb units, or something to notify those people who currently live in the building or who may be interested in renting, that there are quite a few short-term rentals in this building, and maybe that's not something that they want. Or if it's not going to be in the building proper, it could be something on the city's website for that particular property.
And there was an instance on a street, I won't mention, but where there were 4 units, and 2 of the units were, kind of permanent, rentals, and the other were 2 short-term rentals. And, of course, the people said, I would have never moved here.
Yeah.
That happened.
Director Hamp, I have a question for you also just about in reading the legislation, it's very comprehensive. And one thing that I wondered about when we're thinking about compliance by, it seems to me like the vast majority of Airbnb owners are renting out their house. They're doing it to supplement their income. They're probably, managing things just fine, but they're doing it along with another job or family. And they're quite robust reporting requirements of the property owners, quarterly financial reports and occupancy reports. I wonder whether, given what we're hearing from Airbnb and the kind of reporting we might get from them, whether this double reporting do you really believe that that's necessary? I worry about people falling into non-compliance just because of the rigor of that process.
I don't have an answer at the moment, but I think it's a question that's worth considering.
Okay,
Yeah, it seems like
that's
legitimate
probably for me the
consideration.
only part that has drew me up short, thinking, it would take, given the severity of, you don't comply, bang, you lost 6 months. I think we'd have a lot of non-compliance, people that forgot or didn't do their present. Mayor Petrus, yeah.
Wanted to make sure that everyone had a chance to share their thoughts before I shared mine. I have always been focused on bad behavior and preventing bad behavior. So where there's a property where there are no issues, I'm not concerned about that. From my perspective, I don't care if you have someone there for 1 night or 10 nights. I don't care if it's owner occupied or not owner occupied. But when it's a problem, I want to make sure that the city has tools so that we could deal with it. I actually oppose restrictions that would specify the number of days, like what we currently have in our code. And I would oppose something like requiring a conditional use permit. I want to make sure that those people who are currently hosting at their homes are able to continue to do that without too much administrative burden. I also want to make sure that there isn't too much burden created for the staff. Reality is that so many people here at City Hall are already stretched so thin. It's great to hear that, for example, Airbnb's platform can collect and remit taxes. But whenever we're talking about things like requiring reports from homeowners, one, that's creating a burden for the homeowner. And then 2, it's creating an expectation that our city staff review that. And so those are things that I would hope that council would consider whenever drafting legislation.
Thank you, Councilman Tosh.
I'm good.
Okay.
I completely agree about the conditional use permit. On the restriction on the number of days, here's the thing. You let people who are not owner occupied rent for one day, and you're asking for the problems that you're just talking about. That's saying, you know, that's creating the condition where you're gonna get a lot more of the problems that you're talking about. And I can read you chapter and verse how that is not only that happened here last weekend. I sent you the police report. But more than that, you know, you really have to look at, you know, what I think we want to do with these regulations is create a situation where it's much less likely to happen.
I would say that in those situations, yes, we want to make sure that we have the tools to adequately address them. But there have been plenty of times over the years whenever I have stayed somewhere for one night, 2 nights, and I promise you, I've never been problematic to a host. And so I think that, you know, again, where, you know, it may not be problematic, where they're not disruptive to the neighborhood, it shouldn't matter to us as much.
And the
And we
reality,
also want compliance.
the
We also
reality
want
is
compliance.
if you go on the Airbnb platform now and search for a one night rental in Cleveland Heights, you can find a lot of them. They're already,
And it's currently
they're
not
not complying with that rule.
Can I just
Well,
ask a
enforcement is always.
question for you? So, because I'm getting caught up on this along with you know, everybody else that's new here, but so what were you suggesting a certain day minimum or?
Yeah, I mean, and it's very common, and that's where the owner occupied versus the non-owner
Right.
occupied come in, because guess what's not gonna happen when it's owner occupied? You're not gonna get 20 college kids who invite 50 of their friends to come over for one night in somebody's house that's living there. It ain't gonna happen. If you have one night and it's, you know, standalone and the owner's in California, which is the instance I'm talking about from last week, much more likely.
So did you have a particular minimum day in mind,
Well,
or have you?
I think it's something we need to consider. I'm gonna just leave it at that right now.
Okay. I mean, and the only other thing I wanted to say, which is that I am very for, particularly after hearing that Airbnb can facilitate the collection and the remittance of the tax, I 100% think that these, no matter owner occupied or not, should be taxed. I mean, this is essentially running a business out of their house. They're getting revenue. We tax our small business. I mean, you know, our small businesses pay income taxes on their employees, and I don't see why this would be any different. And not to say that we want to penalize them, but I do feel like there's a fairness here that the city should, and to Mayor Petrus's point, there's going to be city services and enforcement that's going to be involved, and we should be not providing that for free for the owners of these short-term rentals.
I mean, there's a double taxation here that'll happen. I mean, you have the tax that the resident pays, the renter pays, that will indirectly get sent to us. And then you have what shows up as income and a K-1 for the
Two different parties.
yeah,
Same as a hotel.
yeah, for the owner.
Same as the, I mean, we do, I mean, Cuyahoga County has the bed tax, right? And
Tax, and
yeah,
then the company still has income that results from it.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you're not wrong, but I don't think it's
it's not uncommon.
singular.
It doesn't scare anybody, apparently.
Let me ask the council this, you know, we have a piece of legislation that moved forward in process last year. Do you feel like you want to continue to work with that legislation as a model, or do something, is that, are we at a place where we think, you know, we should take a fresh look? What's your pleasure?
I think there are enough issues that have been raised this evening that take this draft legislation, which everybody worked on very carefully, and look at the issues that have been raised this evening. You've been taking notes, I've been taking notes. It does say to go back to the short-term rental time period. This legislation defines it as less than 30 days.
Which is what,
And that's the
that's
only
the state definition.
section. Yeah,
What a
so
lot of-
that would make Mayor Petrus happy. But we never really got into defining the other end of it. Should it be 7 to 30 days, you know, so
I mean, there were some discussions
Yes.
internally about that, and
yes.
in this draft, the conclusion of those discussions was to remove
Yes.
the lower end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I personally would like to see sometime to use this draft as your baseline, which is really well done, and then just look at those issues we raised today.
I'd also like to get your thoughts about the community engagement on this legislation. This will be a big topic, both on both sides, I would imagine, the owners and the Airbnb operators and the residents. When you've had a topic like this that probably has broad community engagement, what's worked best, do you think, in terms of discussing this legislation?
So we did that, and by the way, we should do it again, because it's been years.
Did what?
It's been years. Community engagement, as a matter of fact, I would say there were probably, you might have been here, I don't remember, but there were at least 10 Airbnb or short-term rental owners in the room, no users, just owners. And the whole thing, if I could boil it down, was we don't want to interfere at all with the people who are following the law and running their business and policing it themselves. We want it to be just as easy as it is now, but we do want to make it difficult for people who are not.
So you're suggesting that we do maybe a little bit a version of what you talked about, Councilman Cohen, in the realtors versus the housing inspectors, having two different sort of hearings. So we have a hearing with those who are, or a committee meeting, or a gathering of with those who are the people who are operating Airbnbs, and then from neighbors. I don't know.
I mean, what we can do, you asked what's worked best. I don't know if anything's worked best, because we'll still have people at the very end come and say, I didn't know you were working on this, and like, how could this happen? So, but what we have done, which is I think what we're doing with
3 years isn't enough.
Yeah, with ADUs, and is I think at some point, once we have a draft that is like council agrees that we would like to move forward, the planning department is very good with this. I think we should have some sort of public event, a public hearing, and then have that out with enough time for people to look it over and come, and then allow for public comment. I feel like those have been, and that makes it what I think is when we have a public hearing on something, it is a big deal as opposed to.
So you think that's
buying
appropriate?
trucks?
Do a public hearing on this
absolutely.
topic? Okay.
Just because something happened 3 years ago,
Right.
and I think tweak. The committee should break it down into little pieces and just say, is this the way we want to do these 6 or 8
Right.
components that are most important to us, and then come up with a draft, present it to the rest of council, and
One other topic
then
also
do the hearing.
Yeah, okay, that's a good idea. Since you mentioned ADUs, when in the survey of ADUs, the potential of ADUs to become Airbnbs was a really a big issue. So to the extent that might appear in this, I don't know how that would interface with whatever might be coming forward for ADUs, but those will have to interlock in some ways.
Right. I think that on the ADU piece, it would have to, the ADU, one of the buildings, either the principal or the ADU, has to be owner occupied. But I think that if it was going to be, whatever building would then fall under this ordinance, right? Like which the ADU would have to, if the ADU or the principal dwelling was an Airbnb, was a short-term rental, that's not the ADU part of the code. It would be this ordinance
I
that
think
governs.
that's right, yeah. This does allow non-owner occupied property.
Right, and so I'm just saying, like, it would fall under the owner occupied segment of
Correct.
this, correct? Yeah.
Director Butler.
I was encouraged by your conversation with the Airbnb platform, and just to see how welcoming they are to help make a draft. It might be for selfish reasons, of course, because they want to do, and they have experience on the faults. So they've gotten the complaints from many other cities across the country, and they know where the complaints come from. The data is there. So I think looking at whatever version they propose or we propose with them, comparing it to what we have and seeing what works best. They have the data, they can provide it to us.
Sure.
We can see where the flaws lie.
Especially the process of implementing it, I think that's a question.
Yeah, so I think when everybody evaluates this, and at least if it comes to council, a question I would have is if there's going to be a tax provision that gets built into this in the end, how do you justify that? And maybe the simple answer is City of South Euclid charges a 10% tax. So we need to charge a
Probably
10% tax too.
3%.
I'm pulling a number out of there, a 3% tax. And then I think you can justify it based on, well, it's gonna increase police activity and X, Y, and Z and
Staffing.
And the proposed state legislation requires that if you have a lodging tax, then you have to apply it to short-term rentals as well. If you have it now
And
or
it's-
if you adopt it in the future.
And it's the customer who's paying it, it's not the homeowner who's paying that tax.
So process-wise, are you thinking that we'll redline this and then come to the next housing
I think
committee?
that, I have notes on some of the topics we discussed today. Maybe in the next 2 weeks, you could send me your thoughts about things. We could see if how the topics interrelate. I can meet with Director Hannah and we can move forward and bring a new, probably the next step would be to bring a new draft to you as well as an update on the Airbnb conversation. And I have asked for their recommendations for city. As soon as I get them, I will bring those to you.
One more question. Airbnb is only one of two main, are we also talking about VRBO?
Well, my understanding about VRBO is that they have a much less active government affairs department, and I would guess that whatever legislation we would pass, the platforms would both be
The
obligated to
legislation will
follow.
apply to any platform, yeah.
I just am
In terms of
curious
what they
if
have set up.
I'll give it a try.
that's what I'm
I'll see what I
curious
can
about.
do.
Particularly the tax piece, right? Because if they're
course.
not able to facilitate that, then, maybe we can only allow publishing on Airbnb. I don't even know if that's an option, but it's something
I mean, right,
Most of them
I'm
are
not
on
sure you
both.
could do
Most
that.
of them are both.
Right.
Yeah.
Well-
You did mention, I'm sorry, that they have some reciprocal understanding of
It's only when a
Bad
property
actors.
is deemed to be unsafe and they take it off the platform, then VRBO, they both, the property leaves all the platforms. At least those two.
there is some sort of
Yeah.
working.
I tried to
between
ask
two.
them about their relationship. They were circumspect on that one, yeah.
I would also am encouraged by Airbnb's ability and willingness to communicate with their current hosts. That there's a change in your city if we did adopt this legislation. There's a change in your city which would help our department because the staff wouldn't have to make that notification. Airbnb would make that notification, so I'd like to know if VRBO would do
Yeah.
that as well.
Well, and one last note on that is that many cities require that the property owner have a current registration number on the platform and displayed in property. So Airbnb could conceivably be a check to say, I don't have a current registration number from property Z, get on it, city. All right, are there anything else for the good of the order? We've covered a lot of territory this evening.
VRBO does have information about collection and remittance of taxing and lodging taxes.
Follow up on that. All right, then I think with that, this meeting was adjourned. Thank you so much.